Aloha and welcome to the Center for Chinese Studies at UH Manoa. My name is Jonathan Pettit from the Department of Religions and Ancient Civilizations. This webinar series is hosted by CCS to foster interdisciplinary understanding of mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and other Chinese-speaking societies worldwide, as well as the Chinese civilization and its long connections to Hawaii. So this webinar series is open and free for all and is one of the center's main conduits to engage with scholars in Chinese studies worldwide. So today we have a student presentation, discussion, and a Q&A session. So for those of you in attendance, just be aware of some logistical concerns. At the bottom, you'll see different buttons. Perhaps two of the most important. One is the Q&A tool, the Q&A tab. So if you have a question at any time throughout either of the two talks, please use the question and answer tab to post questions. Those questions will be passed along to the speaker, and either I or Dr. Brown will ask those questions out loud in the Q&A session. If you have any kind of logistical problems of hearing or seeing, there's also a transcription if you want to transcribe. Any other kind of those questions, there's a chat feature where you can ask questions in the chat. So those are kind of the two ways to engage. So before I begin, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the director for the Center for Chinese Studies, Dr. Mingbao Yu, Associate Director Ni Zhang, and Assistant Adriana Choi. So it's through their tireless effort in hosting and promoting this webinar that we can all be here today. So kind of official welcome to today's webinar, Wong Kim Ark in El Paso, investigating Chinese immigrants who crossed the US-Mexico border 1892 to 1953. So today's moderator will be Dr. Shauna Brown, an Associate Professor of History and Director of the Honors Program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She specializes in the history of science and visual culture, focusing on modern China in global and local contexts. Her recent publications include articles on a 19th century female Chinese painter and women in Chinese archaeology in the 20th century. Her book Pastimes was published in Chinese translation in 2004 by Zhejiang University Press. Dr. Brown, please.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you very much to the CCS for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel today. Just want to say aloha mai kako, daja hao, and good afternoon to all of our audience members, and thank you also for being part of our talk today. Today we are delighted to present a talk by Shouyue Zhang. Shouyue is a PhD candidate in history at the University of Melbourne. His dissertation examines the Chinese exclusion laws and the resilience of Chinese immigrants in 20th century Texas. His 2025 fieldwork in Texas was supported by the Alma Hansen Scholarship and the Arts PhD Fieldwork Grant. His article and book reviews have been published in the New York Archives and Journal of American Ethnic History. Thank you so much, Shouyue, for being with us today, and we look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm presenting my slide. So if you can't see the slide or hear from me, please let us know. And in the beginning, I really appreciate for the faculty at the Center for Chinese Studies of UHM for hosting these sessions. And as a PhD candidate, this presentation is based on the first chapter of my dissertation. My dissertation currently it explores the comprehensive Chinese immigrant histories in the 20th century Texas, from the beginning of Chinese exclusion laws to the end of 20th centuries. And I chose this time period for this presentation, 1892 to 1953, because my primary sources are limited in this time period. It does not mean that these stories are limited in this period. Okay. I acknowledge the traditional owner of the land of Melbourne, where my home institution is located, and in Mauna, Hawaii, where our hosting institute is located. My presentation begin with event happened on October 29, 1901. A Chinese American was arrested in El Paso, Texas, after crossing the border from Mexico. However, Charles Mahan, a U.S. border inspector specializing in hunting Chinese immigrants during the Chinese exclusion era, did not recognize this suspect as one of the most famous figures in U.S. legal history. His name was Wang Kim Ark, Huang Jinde. It was only 3 years after the landmark U.S. versus Wang Kim Ark decision affirming his and amongst all American-born individuals birthright citizenship. Wang Kim Ark was brought in to court once again to defend his claims to U.S. citizenship. His detention served as an apt metaphor for the persistent vulnerability of Chinese Americans during the exclusion era. Even a U.S. citizen confirmed by the highest court could not migrate freely. After the Supreme Court's decision, we don't know why Wang Kim Ark left California, where he was born in, to Mexico, probably for better employment opportunities, because California was very competitive both for him and the Asian economy. And maybe his business in Mexico was not so success, so he returned from Juarez to El Paso in 1901. But the the U.S. commissioner in the El Paso rejected initially for his re-entry request and review his document for several months. Finally, in the decision recorded by the West District Court of Texas, they said in the red line of this image, this defendant, Wang Kim Ark, is the same Wang Kim Ark who was decided by the Supreme Court of the United States. So when I read these primary sources, a core questions raised in my mind: how did Chinese exclusion policy shape U.S. southern border control regions? I would like to review the part one of my presentation. I will review the historiography about the Chinese American in the U.S. Pacific region. For example, Hawaii, California, and Washington State. Let's see the historical context in case of some audience are not professional historians. And the U.S. Pacific regions is the first landing point for Chinese immigrants to the United States, and population flow spread from port cities into the interior of the United States. And California was the birthplace of the anti-Chinese movements, and many other states in the West America followed California to enact their very similar state law to exclude the Chinese. And finally, in the 1882, the U.S. Congress passed a federal level Chinese exclusion law. And in the Pacific regions, there were early development of Chinese ethnic economy. For example, Chinese restaurant, Chinese grocery store, laundry, and were provided many employment opportunities for local Asian immigrants. So local ethnic economies were very diverse, and they have relatively large scale than the other American states. Meanwhile, there were early formation of Chinese community organizations with a strong capacity for social mobilization. For example, the Chinese Benefit Association and the Chinese American Citizen Alliance, those kind of community organization provide the mutual aid support to the other Chinese fellows. So those are the features of the histories of Pacific regions Chinese Americans. Then I talked about the historical phase and the study about the California Chinese, they kick off the abundant scholarly output of Chinese American studies and Chinese American histories, and there are many great scholarship in about labor history, Western history, gender history, and related fields. And many Chinese American historians, as the images, as their photos indicate in the right side, him, Mark Lai, Su Chen, and Roger Daniels, and Gordon Chang, etc. And they were also social activists and participated in 1970s. And meanwhile, in the U.S. Pacific regions, there were very extensive primary sources with numerous collecting institutions and the well-developed archive systems like the UC Berkeley's Ethnic Study Library and the Huntington Library, etc. And the studies about the Pacific region's Chinese American, they also have very relatively mature theoretical framework that laid the foundation for the study of Chinese American histories in the United States. Recently, in the 2010s and 2020s, there are also many monographies about the Chinese American histories. They moved from the West Coast to the relatively inland, the American West and Midwest and American South, like the Basil Williams' two books, The Chinese Must Go and John Doi, Chinaman, and in 2022, there are two books. One is about the Chinese in Montana. Another one is about the Chinese in Chicago and St. Louis. And those scholarship gave us many interesting research questions and new directions about the Chinese American history studies. For example, during the era of Chinese exclusion, how did the Chinese immigrants' experience differ in regions where Chinese economies and communities were relatively weak? Especially for the states like Montana or the Texas, my research subjects, local Chinese American organizations are underdeveloped. And in the context of internal migration within the United States, how did the Chinese mobilities, by analogy with the African Americans' Great Migration, shape the U.S. histories? Chinese Americans, they won't live in one state permanently. Sometimes they move from California to U.S. West to the East Coast to New York and the other states. So Chinese Americans' internal migration get relatively less attention from historians. And where were the attitudes of residents in inland states toward Chinese communities, and how did the Chinese immigrants affect local minority economies? For example, we know that the Irish Americans competed with the Chinese American for the railroad construction employment. So, what were attitudes of the other racial groups, and what were the attitudes of Americans in the the less populated state? And so when the first Chinese groups moved to those less populated states and opened the first Asian featured economy, what were local people's attitude toward those business? And finally, my question is that have historians focused on Chinese experience in the Pacific region led to overgeneralization and stereotyped interpretation of Chinese American history wide. And there are also many good scholarship about Chinese, like in East Coast, like New York, and the other mo- the other state with many populations. And so I think, how about Texas? So that's why I chose this topic. Uh, I would like to talk about the research trends. So you can see from my mentioned scholarships, there are many historians take a transnational history approach and they explore the race relationship, especially like the Joy Doi Chinaman. It talk about the Chinese uh, uh, suspects and the white people and the other races legal relations. And there are also recent trends about the borderland study, which was interdisciplinary engagement with sociology and anthropologies. So those recent trends have a positive impact on my own study. So let's talk specifically about U.S.-Mexican border historiographies. And Erica Lee published a journal article titled "Enforcing the Borders in the American Historical Review," and she points out that as 80% of Chinese arriving at Mexican seaports eventually reached the U.S.-Mexico borders. The southern borders emerged as a site of context over illegal immigration from the 1918 to 1924, this time period. And historian Elliot Young, in his book Alien Nations, he argued that the Chinese migrants constructed alternative communities and identity through transnational migrations. Uh, and Julian Lim, her book is the most influential book for my project. She points out that the U.S.-Mexican borderland as porous borders were constructed by multiple races. Like, for example, the Mexicans, they were hired to help Chinese people to cross the borders. Uh, and also the Chinese immigrants border crossings were constructed by the other race like the white and the Latinos. And there are also many scholarship about the Chinese Mexican histories, like the Chinos and also the dedication of Dr. Jian Gao, our commentators, and they contributed to the academic discussions of these topics. Uh, However, I I don't find a specific monograph focused on the Chinese American history studies in Texas state. Many stories mentioned the others about Chinese American. They are focused on the other states or the U.S. Mexican borderland. My dissertation structures begin from this uh, presentation. This chapter, the first chapter is about Chinese border crossing, and then I will talk about Chinese plantation workers and Chinese railroad constructors, and I will also talk about the pioneer Chinese families. Some of them, they were Persian Chinese who were servicemen in of Chinese Mexicans. They helped the U.S. General John Pershing's invade to Mexican. So the General Pershing brought those Chinese servicemen back to the U.S. and U.S. Congress passed a law to awarded those Persian Chinese U.S. citizenship. So some of my case studies is about those Persian Chinese descendants who are living in San Antonio today. And then I will talk about the post-World War II, the Chinese communities in Austin and Houston, and how they were involved in the Cold War competitions. And so that's my dissertation structures. My research approach from today's presentations, the major part of my primary sources are from the records of district courts of Texas and the Immigrant and Naturalization Service, those records collected at the National Archives. And those records, I would like to speak more about it. They were divided into two categories. The first category is that how the immigration officials, they arrested Chinese border crosser, they interviewed them, they took a picture of them, and then they found, okay, they were not legal visitors, so they will transfer those Chinese suspects to the court. The U.S. Federal Court in the West District of Texas, Southern District of Texas, were dealing with those Chinese cases. So the district court cases will issue the final decision of deporting those Chinese. So those two part primary sources could tell us a story about how Chinese were caught and how they were deported, the whole process. And the National Archive in Texas, they only collected those government records and the legal records from the 1892 to 1953, basically covered the time period of conducting Chinese exclusion laws in the southern borders. And in the other chapters, I also take a approach I called the community-based approach. I collaborated with local individuals like the archives, and activists, scholars, and descendants of Chinese Texans. I interviewed the descendants of Chinese Texans, but in these presentations, is relatively less oral history product. And I would like to maintain an outsider objectivity while gaining inside perspective through sustained engagement. Last April and May, I visited Texas for 2 months and traveled many cities. And today, this year, I'm visiting research affiliate in the Institute for Historical Study at the University of Texas at Austin. So I will stay in Austin for 3 months from January to April. I will do more field work and conduct more oral history interviews. And I hope to pay back to the local individuals and organizations who helped me. So I contributed to the Preserve our Community History project, and I also helped the descendants of Chinese Americans to find their relatives in China and America. Okay, let's talk about the history itself. The enforcing in the Chinese exclusion laws in Texas-Mexican border were later than their enforcement in California. Although the California, they have state law to exclude the Chinese and limited Chinese business as early as the late 19th centuries, but in the Texas, they set the border control against the Chinese as late as the 1890s, and after the Gary Act, in the you can see the Bureau of Immigration and the district court start to collect the legal documents about the Chinese deportants. And in the meanwhile, in the other side of the U.S.-Mexican borders, there were anti-Chinese movements in the Mexico. Historians call it xenophobia. Xenophobia means xenophobia against the Chinese. So under the pressure of xenophobia, the Chinese Mexicans, the major part of them returned to China, but thousands of them crossed the border to find a new life in America. For those Chinese Americans who cross the border, some of them want to travel via America to China because there are more ships and the transportations in California. But the others, they want to have their new life in America, and Texas is the choice of many of them. However, during the World War One, the U.S. Congress passed the Passport Act and the Immigration Act of 1917, and so the Bureau of Immigration, they required the Texas border control officials to investigate all non-American border crossers. In the other words, I have a hypothesis is that the border control against the Chinese in the southern border laid a foundation for the U.S. southern border control regions. And so those systems running for almost half a century, it was repealed during the World War II when the U.S. and China were the wartime allies. So the U.S. Congress think it is not proper for still conducting a Chinese exclusion law. They repealed of the Chinese exclusion law in 1943. Okay. And in my cases, I will talk about two groups of people who were deported. The first group is that the interrogation of Chinese visitors entering the Texas. The second group is that the deportation of undocumented Chinese residents already living in Texas. The second group means that some of Chinese deporters, they may be moved from the other American state to Texas, like California or the other Western state. They are not border crossers, but they were caught in Texas. So they were reviewed by judges of Texas and deported by them. So who caught them? There is a professional official named Chinese inspectors. They were created as law enforcement officers in 1908, but at the early stage of Chinese inspectors, they were understaffed. They has very limited fundings. The situation was changed after the 1917 to 1918 because the Immigration Act of 1917 empowered them to more money and manpower to conduct immigration laws. In the word of historian Deborah Kahn in her book The INS on the Line, she points out that only after the 1917 and 1918, the officials in the southern border, they were more seriously to carry their jobs. So those Chinese inspectors, they operated in cities and borderlands. They approached and reviewed any individuals who look like Chinese. From the autobiography of Chinese inspectors, he says that they judge Chinese only by the likeness and ethnicness. So those standards are very subjective. So they have three parts of job. First, they deported undocumented Chinese residents in Texas cities. In my cases, one Chinese person, he was the waiter of a local cafeteria. So he served those Chinese inspectors several times, but those Chinese inspectors arrested him after several months and find out that this waiter don't have legal document and deported him. And their second job is they investigated Chinese border crossers at immigration stations like the El Paso, Laredo, and Galveston. El Paso and Laredo is in the border between the Texas and Mexican. Galveston is a porter city very close to Houston. And Galveston as a border city, actually it is far from the border, but there were also many cases about Chinese who took ships from Mexico and arrived in Galveston. So they were reviewed by the local border control officials. So the government officers, they were surprised why there are many Chinese arrived from the Atlantic side, because as Erica Lee revealed that the California's Angel Island station, they were very rigorous. They have very mature system against Chinese visitors. So some Chinese Americans, so some Chinese visitors, they arrived in Mexico from the west coast of Mexico and travel to the east coast of Mexico and took ship to the Gulf. Uh, so this is a very impressive trip to avoid the Chinese exclusion law. And the third part of Chinese inspectors' jobs, they intercepted unauthorized Chinese while patrolling the borders. In the other words, some unauthorized Chinese, they were suffering from the human trafficking. So Chinese inspectors also hunting them. And this image is what I found in my primary sources. This is an inspector, his arm pressed the head of a Chinese suspect. In the document, those Chinese suspect's name, you can see in the top right corner is Tu Yu Fang, alias Tsu Yin. So I sometimes those Chinese visitors, they spoke Chinese, and all the Cantonese, the Chinese speakers don't have translator, so they have to record by the pronunciations of those Chinese suspect. So I maybe those suspects' name, Chinese name, is similar to Yu Fang. This is one possibility. But another possibility is that they suspect understand English and gave them this nickname Tu Yu Fang to make a joke, to say to tell the court the law of Chinese exclusion is a funny thing. Anyway, I like this picture because this picture showed this man Tu Yu Fang is like a rebellion. He didn't give up. He didn't surrender to these bad laws. He showed the spirit of struggling. And now some of them may be curious is where did the Chinese migrants found in Texas come from? So those the right there is a map from the Eliot Young's book. He draw some migration from the Latin American and Canada's border side. It shares that the Chinese diaspora happened not only across the Pacific, the Chinese diaspora also in the Americas, in the North America. North America should be regarded as a whole when we review the Chinese borderland histories. Obviously, major part come from China. They may be passed via California or Mexico and arrived in Texas. And even Texas is not their destination. They may be want to transfer via Texas to the other American states, but unfortunately, they were found in Texas. And as I mentioned, there are also many Chinese people, they moved from the California and the other states. They maybe get some legal documents in California and they think, okay, that will enable me to work in Texas. However, the Chinese exclusion law evolved with times. For example, in 1990s, they required all the Chinese residents to carry their certificate every time. And in the late 19th century, they required Chinese people to apply return certificate if they live in America and want to return to America again. In this way, the requirements of Chinese exclusion is get more rigorous and strict. Therefore, even Chinese Americans in the other state, they have legal document, but with time going by, their document maybe cannot meet the new Chinese exclusion laws. And finally, as the many Chinese Mexican historians remind us, they want to escape the escalating anti-Chinese violence, either in Mexico, in Cuba, and South America. As one of the Chinese inspector tell in his autobiography, nobody wanted them. Few people made any attempt to understand them, and detention would mark as fertile most of the effort and money expended. So this is where they were coming from. So where did they go after they arrived in Texas? So if they passed the review of the border control sections, some of them would work in the plantations as the coolies, and some of them will open the first Asia featured business like the grocery store, restaurant, and laundries in cities like San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. They Chinese Americans were regarded as the earliest Asian Americans in Texas, and those businesses provided more choice and diverse opportunities for the local residents, for the non-Chinese Texans. So they made a contribution to the diversity and the development of Texas. And also there are some Chinese visitors, they live in Texas because Texas only have maybe hundreds of Chinese in the early 20th centuries, and more than 100 and only more than 1,000 people after the World War II. So they cannot find enough people to marry or to interact with them. So some people leave the Texas. But the story of their residency in Texas still important. Tell us many different sides of U.S.-Mexican borderland histories, and as well as the Chinese diaspora histories in the Americas. Okay, now I would like to introduce three specific cases about my research, and as each case provided a very important topic about the U.S. histories. The first case is about Mr. Chong, and he lived in California for 10 years, and he have the when he entered the U.S., when he arrived in California, he get approved from the U.S. border in control in the California side. So when he arrived in Texas shortly, the U.S. Congress passed the 1982 the Gary Act, required all the Chinese residents in the United States to apply for a Chinese resident certificate. But Mr. Chong didn't apply for this certificate. So when the court asked him why you didn't apply it, you lived in California, you should know it. But Mr. Chong said, I didn't apply it because the interference and the prejudice of others, especially by the 6 companies acting under their directions. So who were 6 companies? 6 companies is a European Americans name given to a Chinese mutual aid organization. Their today's name is Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Associations. So those CCBA, so CCBA's they hired lawyers. They want to challenge the Gary Act of 1982. So they mobilized many California Chinese to boycott the Gary Act. The CCBA's lawyer told them, if nobody register for the Chinese resident certificate, they maybe make this law void. So they will want to challenge this law to the U.S. Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Mr. Chong agreed to their mobilization, so he didn't apply for it. Then he moved to Texas and was sent to the court due to his undocumentations. However, in the 1893, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that the Gary Act is conform to the U.S. Constitutions and denied the request of CCBA in the case named Fang Yueting versus U.S. As a result, the Texas District Court deported Mr. Chong's back to China, although he had lived in America for more than 10 years. So this is one case. This case revealed that the Chinese activism not only happened in California, there were interstate activism with the moving of Chinese Americans from California to the other states. When Chinese Americans moved inland, they also brought their California activism to the local states. And the local Chinese organizations, they could hear about what the California Chinese, like the headquarters, what headquarters did. So then they could adjust the local Chinese American strategies towards the law enforcement. So interstate activism should get our attentions. The second case is about female Chinese border crossers. From the previous research, their previous historians' research about female Chinese American histories are about about their career, like the prostitute and laundry workers. Also, is about their interracial marriage, their families. But less attention has been given to the female Chinese border crossers. So from my primary sources, I found two Chinese border crossers. At that days, there from the documents of U.S. District Court that there were only two Chinese border crossers. Both of them were female, and at that days, no other Chinese male crossed the borders, which means that those two Chinese women, they traveled without the accompany of any guys. And I see their legal documents, they share the same witness. So they had two witnesses to speak for them both. Therefore, I think those two women know each other. They travel together. And their presence challenged the orthodoxy of Chinese migrants or Chinese border crossers as a bachelor societies. They shared that the resilience and independence of Chinese women. But those legal documents cannot provide more information. The judge only denied their entry request and deported them back to China. So there are some questions I have to answer. Who were they and why did they cross the borders? My current primary source cannot provide answer to it, but those two cases could provided us a gender history side about the Chinese border crosser histories. And finally, I would like to talk about a family history about the Chinese border crosser and the cross-border business. This case is happened in the 1920s. Senior man, Mr. Li, he is a lifelong Texas resident. He married to he moved to America when he was about 9 years ago. So he was born in China, but he arrived in America as a boy. So he lived in Texas for a long time. He worked more than 30 years for the Southern Pacific Railroad Company, and he married a Mexican-American woman. They have 5 children, and he was a skilled professionals, and he had some money. So he invested mine in the Mexico side when he traveled to Mexico for the first time. However, in his second time's travel, when he returned to America, he was arrested at the Laredo at the years more than 70, because although he has the Chinese residence certificate, but he didn't apply for a return certificate under the new immigration rules. As I mentioned previously, that the Chinese exclusion law were involving. The new laws require them, they must get a return certificate, but Mr. Lee don't know it. So when he second time return, he don't have this document. When he was investigated by the immigration officers, he tells them, I want to stay in the United States as long as I live and keep my family before I die. He was more than 70s. If you send me back to Mexico, you are mightily crucial to my family because they had nobody to keep them up in the Texas. So their family lived in Houston. But if you send me to other countries, I will suicide myself. So this statement was very strong and heartbreaking for him. And when inspectors traveled to Houston and asked question to his wives, in case your husband should be deported to China or return to Mexico, will you care to go with them? And his wife said, I would not go to China or to Mexico if I could help it, as I have no people in either place, and my husband is old. I do not think he could make a living for us. If they deported the whole family back to China or Mexico, they cannot make a living. As a result, the Bureau of Immigration suggested the court to deport Mr. Lee back to Mexico. Mr. Lee was deported to the Ciudad Laredo in the Mexico side after the court decisions, and we don't know his other stories, his story after that, and we don't know what happened about their families when the family separation happened. Mm. In these cases, you can share that you can say that although those families they were they have a job, they have money, and in the they have properties in Houston, the U.S. border law still would separate the families if they didn't meet the U.S. exclusion laws. So I would like to provide a summary. I am I'm in the academic discussions with the historians like Monho Jun and Kelly Little Hernandez and the Yuzuma Quarosis. Although their books are not specifically about Chinese in Texas, but their approach or their arguments inspires my arguments. The Monho Jun, in his book Cooley and Ken, he write about how Chinese labor replaced the black enslaved people in the Louisiana. Louisiana is in the east side to Texas. Their environment are very similar. And Mo Ho Jun told us that the coolie situations constructed Americans' image about Chinese and race issues in the United States. So in the South Texas, there were also many plantations hired Chinese laborers in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. And from the Kelly Layton Hernandez book, Migra, she introduced how the U.S. border patrol system were constructed, but she mentioned only a few about the Chinese. Most of her discussion about Chinese is in the California border sites. But from my story, you can see that there were interstate activism from the California to Texas. There were also specific stories about the Chinese border crossers in the Texas side. And for the Professor Yuzuma Koros's book, she tell about how the early Cold Wars, University of Houston and the other Texas Higher Education Institute encouraged Asian immigrants to get educated there. So from my story, the other chapters, the later chapter of my projects, I tell that the Chinese peoples, they achieved the upward mobilities by the educations, like the situation of South Asians. So from this presentation, you can see that the earlier Chinese border crossers, most of them, they were unskilled laborers. So they have to make a living by work by work in the industries. They like the marginal people groups. But with the time going by and more and more elite Chinese moved to Texas, and more Chinese or the greater Chinese from the Hong Kong, Taiwan, they get Texas for higher education. So they moved from the margins to the center of U.S. politics. And they moved from the borderland, like the El Paso and the Laredo, Galveston, to the center, to the heartland of Texas, like Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. My intervention in the historiography is that during the Chinese exclusion era, Chinese migrants exercised agency by moving inland in search of better opportunities. And female border crossers and the wives of and children of deported male immigrants, they deserve more scholarly attention to their everyday life. And the U.S. border controls destroyed not only Chinese Texan communities, but also their biracial families and cross-border business. Today's Texas is ranked as the third largest Chinese American populations in the United States after the California and New York. They have more people than Hawaii. However, although they have more people, but most of them were moved to Texas after the 1965 immigration reform. And there were only less than 0.007% of Chinese of the whole people in the Texas. So their percentage is relatively small. But the Chinese border crosser story still happens after the pandemic of COVID-19. From the source of U.S. customer and border protection data, after the since 2023, the number of undocumented Chinese were increased to more than 2,000 of people every month. So that's large numbers. So the right map is designed by a media. So they tell us how the undocumented Chinese cross the U.S. borders after the pandemic. They flight to arrived in Ecuador. Ecuador's Quito. Ecuador don't have visa requirement to Chinese citizens, so those people could arrive there, and they work along with the Latin Americans, undocumented immigrants, and arrived finally in the U.S. southern border. They overcome the many difficulties and challenges as much as Latin American immigrants. So we can see that the Chinese border crossers happened both during the Chinese exclusion areas and even today's. That's why our research project could tell the historical echoes to the today's. I would like to end by a quote from historian Adam Goldman's. Today, as in the past, streamlining expulsions and promoting self-deportations continues to serve as a way to augment state power while sidestepping legal and financial constraints without regard to individuals, families, and communities' well-beings. The family separations happened in the 1920s and 2020s. Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you so much, Shouyue. That was a really wonderful talk, very rich and exciting information. Just a reminder to our audience to please enter your questions and anything that you want Shouyue to speak to more in the Q&A box. So, and we might have a moment or two after our discussant to ask Shouyue and also Professor Gao for some follow-up on their notes. May I welcome our discussant to join the conversation. We're really thrilled and honored today to have Jian Gao as our discussant for the talk. Professor Gao is a historian of Chinese migration to the United States and the Americas, specializing in transnational networks, identity, and emotional history. Professor Gao's award-winning scholarship has appeared in leading journals and earned honors from LASA, WHA, and other major organizations. His forthcoming monograph, Journeys of Longing and Belonging, is under contract with UNC Press. His second book examines post-1965 U.S. immigration control. Fluent in 4 languages, he is a presidential scholar at ASU and a recipient of major national fellowships. Thank you, Professor Gao, for being here, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for the introduction, and thank you, Shouyue, for the wonderful presentation. I had the great joy of reading the full paper, and I think the paper makes a very strong and original intervention by repositioning the U.S.-Mexico borderland as a central site in Chinese American history, rather than a peripheral one. I especially want to affirm Shouyue's point that the scholarship on Chinese Texans remains surprisingly limited, given Texas' size, geopolitical importance, and long border history. This relevant absence in the historiography is quite striking. And in that sense, I think the broader dissertation project really fills a great gap and opens up an important regional field of inquiry. By foregrounding Texas, I think Shouyue effectively challenges the field's long-standing coastal bias, which has privileged California, New York, and Hawaii. And I think this shift in geographic focus is one of the paper and one of the project's most significant contributions. And I also think the overall project's the greatest strength is really its methodological range. For the broader dissertation project, Shouyue combines federal court records and Bureau of Immigration files with oral histories, family papers, and community-based research. This multimodal approach allows the narrative to move between state power and everyday life in a very effective way, especially in the deportation cases and the border interrogations. I'm especially fascinated by the community-based project, which is particularly compelling because it demonstrates the ethical engagement with the descendants and local archives rather than an extractive research practice. I think this method also strengthens emotional and social dimensions of Shouyue's analysis. Although the current paper doesn't really present the community-based oral history and personal archives, I would really like to hear more about it for the broader project in the future, or if we have time in this session. I think the case studies are especially powerful. The return of Wong Kim Ark to the court in El Paso adds an important afterlife to a canonical Supreme Court case. As we all know about this case, it's the Supreme Court case in 1898 that really solidified the Chinese Americans' claim to citizenship, to their birthright citizenship. The fact that a legally affirmed citizen could still be detained underscores really the fragility of citizenship under exclusion. Similarly, I think the story of Li Sui and his forced separation from his family vividly demonstrates how immigration law functioned as a tool of social destruction, not merely border regulation. I think these moments humanize the archive and really avoid abstraction. I also appreciated the way the paper highlights the extensive internal mobility of Chinese migrants. The movement of Chinese individuals and families from Texas to places such as New York City, the Mississippi Delta, and other regions points to a much broader national network of Chinese mobility than we often acknowledge. And obviously, I think, as Shouyue pointed out, the historiography has already recognized that and has moved towards that direction of recognizing there are many different Chinese communities within the United States and also beyond. I think this emphasis really usefully complicates the static notion of Chinatown or fixed settlement patterns. It also invites us to think more carefully about how these sites were connected to older Chinese American hubs in California. I think making those linkages more explicit could further strengthen the paper's intervention, showing how Texas fit into a wider interregional system of Chinese migration, labor, and also activism across the United States. And I wonder if there's more evidence showing a more sustained connections between Chinese Texans and Chinese communities in other parts of the United States or Mexico, besides simply showing that these Chinese migrants moved from Texas from elsewhere in the United States or Mexico. For instance, organizational records like the Chinese from the Chinese six companies, or the CKT, the Qigongtong, or the KMT, the Kuomintong, etc., or other kinds of native place or surname-based organizations, they may showcase a more sustained communication and also financial transactions between different branches of these organizations in different parts of the country and also the world. Family records may show communications of the Chinese migrants, Chinese Americans between family, friends, business partners in different parts of the United States and also beyond. At the same time, I would encourage Shouyue to engage more directly with the historiography on Chinese Mexicans and also borderland history south of the US line. In particular, I want to point out Grace Pena Delgado's work on Chinese communities in the Arizona-Sonora borderlands, which seems especially relevant to Shouyue's work as well. Her scholarship on transborder mobility, racialization, and everyday life among Chinese migrants in northern Mexico could provide a productive comparative framework and deepen the paper or the project's analysis of the cross-border dynamics. And also more recently, we know about the work of America's Lost Chinese by Hugo Wang, who documented his ancestor Wang Fu Chuck's journey on the US-Mexico borderlands as well. I think bringing this literature into a more explicit dialogue with the Texas cases would strengthen the transnational dimension of the project and situate it more firmly within the Mexican and borderlands historiography and not just the US immigration history. I also want to push a bit more on the central historiographical claim that the Chinese exclusion, quote, laid foundational practices for US border control systems that persist today. I think this is an important point, but also I think it is a well-established point. It's a well-established argument in the field, right? Especially in the work of Erica Lee at America's Gates. As it stands, I'm not entirely sure how this paper's intervention differs from or extends that scholarship. What new dimensions does the Texas-Mexico border add to this argument that we did not already see in Lee's work on federal gatekeeping? Is it a regional court system, the specific practices of inspectors, cross-border family formation, or Mexico-US mobility patterns. I think making this distinction more explicit could help clarify the paper's originality and sharpen its historiographical contribution. I will also be interested to hear more about the role of the Mexican state in these stories. The paper centers the US enforcement practices, but the Chinese mobility across border necessarily involved Mexican authorities, local police, and municipal governments. How visible are Mexican legal regimes in the sources, and how might incorporating them further change the story being told? Finally, I appreciate the attention to Chinese women at the border, especially in the case of Lo Sum and Zhou Guo. This opens up important questions about gender, mobility, and risk that will be developed even further. Overall, I think this is a richly researched and ambitious paper, and I think the project is fantastic. By foregrounding an understudied region, tracing the internal Chinese mobility and connecting past exclusion to present-day border politics, I think it makes a valuable contribution to Chinese American history. I think more explicit engagement with the Chinese Mexican scholarship and also clear articulation of its historiographical contributions will make an already strong project even stronger. Thank you.
Shouyue, do you want to take a moment to respond to Professor Gao, or do you want to open up to some other questions?
We can open up to questions. I can respond to Dr. Gao privately.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. I had a brief comment, which I welcome your response to, and then another question that came in actually from Professor Jonathan Pettit, but just to kind of confirm my own understanding, when you were talking about the kind of Chinese inspectors, I think it's probably fairly clear from your work as well as from our understanding, but that was kind of unique in US immigration policy, right? We don't think of there being like German inspectors or French inspectors or something like this, right? But this was a group that is really unique to US immigration policy for this specific community, for this specific immigrant group, right? Is that just to confirm my understanding?
Okay.
Do you want me
Sorry.
should I put it in the chat?
Professor Patty's question is about African Americans migration. Is the same question?
Sure. It was kind of a follow-up question, absolutely, from Professor Pettit. Could you offer us a comparison between what you say about Chinese migration within the United, like internal movement, and also the comment you made about the Great Migration of African Americans?
Yes. Thank you. First, I think the scholarship about the African Americans' internal migration is extensive and very remarkable. And there are some similarities between Chinese migrants and African American migrants. Both of them were looking for the better employment and living opportunities. Both of them had agencies to move. But there were some differences in that African Americans, their citizenship got more protections and verifications by the US authorities. However, the Chinese Americans migrants, they were under the threat and the danger of losing their American residence all the time when they move. So Chinese American migrants had to be more careful when they move inland, and when they move to other states, they used to get the help from the local Chinese mutual aid organizations, as the Dr. Gao mentioned, the KMT and the CCBA and the other organizations. So Chinese Americans in internal migration was still in the network of their of Chinese American communities. They know where they were from, and they know where they want to go, and so they believe that they will get the new jobs in the new state with the help of the ethnic communities. That could be a little different than the African American migrations. So I place their stories in the framework of immigration histories, as the Professor Sala in his book, The Wars Within the Americans. There are many restrictions against immigrants, even they have arrived in the Americans, in their living, in their employment, in their educations.
So yeah, another question has to do with you made a comment about the formation of Chinese community organizations and about how these community organizations had a capacity for mobilization. Of course, perhaps strongest in coastal communities, but you also saw how there could be a kind of connection to some of this community organization through these migrant networks. I wonder if you can just say more about political mobilization. You mentioned boycotts, right? Or kind of, refusing to follow certain policies as a kind of political mobilization. Is that something you could say more about?
Yes. Generally, we think that Chinese political activism in the early 20th century still is the Chinese exclusion areas, mainly in the California, Hawaii, or New York, those states with more populations. It is true, basically, in the early 20th century, the Texas don't have Chinese community organizations with many members. So at that time, the Chinese laborers in Texas, they were they act individually. They don't have the organizations, but those people who moved from California could bring the ideas of we should help each other, we should make organizations. So in the middle 20th centuries, in cities like San Antonio or the Austin, they have small-scale Chinese organizations like 致公党. And in San Antonio, they were made up by the Persian Chinese veterans. And in Austin, there were also some small Chinese merchants associations. And finally, they get together to become a branch of Chinese American Citizen Alliance in the 1950s and 1960s. So they learned from the model of California, and they have their own features. Yes.
Great, thank you so much. I also wanted to comment, I really enjoyed your inclusion of some of the stories that we hear about women migrants who are also caught up in some of these immigration kind of enforcement activities. And I wonder if you can talk about doing research on women specifically. Is there, I imagine there's not as much information as we would like, but can you speak to, your kind of choice as a scholar to include women in these stories?
Yes, thank you. My current project is about the female Chinese textiles. There were two parts. The first part is about the female border crossers. Unfortunately, as Dr. Gao pointed out, there are not so many sources about it. I only have the legal documents, but legal document don't provide their background information. I only can confirm their presence. And the second part is about the marriages between Chinese and the whites and Latinos. That was some women, they were white or Latinos, they married Chinese guys, and some Chinese women, they were the veterans' wives during the World War II. So some Chinese American Texans soldiers, they served overseas during the World War II and meet the local Chinese immigrants and bring them back in according to the War Bride Acts. In this way, the after-war communities in Houston and Austin grew up because more people married to heirs. So their marriages shaped their children as biracial identities, and some of them children are still active in the community service and all the Chinese activities of the festivals. And some of the Chinese women, they were also like doing the volunteer and the community service. In the Austin, there was women organizations. They wanted to do something to educate the next generations. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that. There was a question from an audience member, and this is great. Please keep asking questions about more recently. Shouyue, I think your chart about the rise in border crossings and migration since COVID-19 was very thought-provoking, and just wondering if you have any comments about why we see that increase, especially since it's so risky. So why have we seen an increase in migration since since COVID-19 and the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm not a sociologist and I don't study contemporary issues. I would suggest the audience to search the keywords to learn the other scholar who studies contemporary issue to answer this question. But I can give some basic background information is that during the pandemic of COVID-19, many Chinese in China lost their job and they have they don't like the government's pandemic policies, and they think but they don't have the travel abroad experience, which means that they cannot get legal US visas. So they have to fly to the South Americans and walk across the borders as undocumented immigrants. And after they cross the borders, they will claim refuge to the U.S. government and appeal to get the refuge status. And so this is the situation. However, this phenomenon had get less and less because Ecuador stopped to issue Chinese free visa policies. So the Xian situations is not so many days. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, there was another question about the archives that are available to use in conducting this research. Question was, what parts of Texas have the strongest support in preserving Chinese history, and has recent immigration helped to pique interest in this history of Chinese immigration?
Well, for the first questions, I suggest to see the portal of Texas History. It is a website made by the University of North Texas. They collected many Texas local archives, digitalized archives in their website. And the second question, it's hard to answer which part has a strong support to preserving Chinese. I mean, this is I cannot evaluate these situations. I mean that from my observations, there are many local Asian Americans. They make up the like the Asian American Historical Society in Dallas and the Asia Art Culture Initiative in Austin. They have their own community organizations. They self-govern themselves and preserve the local cultures. And I spoke with them, and I think their work is excellent, but maybe the local Texas government level, they don't have so many specific policy to support it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I have one last question, and I was just curious that you said you are trying to connect with the family members who might have their own family histories of this, of migration through Mexico. I'm just curious, when you contact them, do they welcome this? Are they, has this been a good experience to do kind of oral history research with this community?
Yes, and some community organizations have conducted oral history interviews, and they are making the documentaries about the descendants of pioneers in Chinese. And I also interviewed some of them, most of them are very welcome to get interviews because they want to speak out their family histories, and they have got interviews from like televisions, school newspapers. Yeah, their attitudes are very positive. They want to let the others know their family histories. I really appreciate their collaborations. Yep, but I will remember my job is a historian. I will keep the objectivities.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we really look forward to reading your dissertation, and I'm sure the publications that will result from that. So thank you very much for joining us from very far distance. And also thank you so much to Professor Gao for your wonderful comments and for joining us as well. This was a really terrific panel. I learned a ton, so I just really appreciate this opportunity. For everyone in the audience, please continue to join us for the CCS Global Webinar Series. Our next panel will be on February 4th, same time, 12 to 1:30. The discussion will be China, Southeast Asia, and extractive industries. So we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks for our next panel. Again, thank you very much to our speaker and discussant today. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all.